Paradise Island number 6, the queen who should not be here. Themyscira had survived gods beneath it, gods above it, and gods within its memory. It had balanced Poseidon's ocean will, Hades' underworld gaze, and Ares' sealed war pressure without collapsing into contradiction. The Kangas had become more than a species. They were now a living regulatory system, translating movement into stability across every layer of the island. But there was one kind of intrusion Themyscira had not yet fully faced, a mind that did not belong to myth, heaven, or underworld. A mind that came from conquest, and it arrived without invitation. Themyscira. It began with distortion, not of sea or sky, but of thought. A section of the northern coast simply forgot what it was supposed to be for a moment. The sand did not shift, but its purpose did. Trees nearby leaned in directions they had never leaned before, as if influenced by an unseen directive. The Kangas noticed immediately. Their movement fractured for the first time since the Great Anchor Response incident with Poseidon and Hades. Not into panic, but confusion. A subtle breakdown of synchrony. Something was interfering with structure itself. Not force, not divinity, authority. And then she arrived. Not through ocean, not through sky, but through command. Queen Clea. She stepped onto Themyscira's shore, as if the island had already agreed she could be there. And for a brief moment, it had. The ground accepted her weight before it realized it had not consented. That was the problem. Clea did not look around in awe. She assessed. The Kangas along the coastline halted their movement the moment she appeared. Not because they were told to, but because their internal pattern recognition systems flagged her presence as non-natural authority overlap. She tilted her head slightly. So this is the island that refuses Atlantean jurisdiction. Her voice carried a tone of mild disappointment, as if resistance was an inconvenience, not a challenge. Deep beneath the island, Ares heard, not in struggle, in interest. Clea took one step forward. The island adjusted. She took a second step. The adjustment became resistance. Not physical resistance, but interpretive conflict. The land itself could not decide how to categorize her. She was not a god, not a mortal, not a natural force. She was governance applied without permission. The Kangas responded. Stormstride clans moved toward coastal stabilization points. Deep Fern clans began tracking her through environmental resonance rather than sight. Sunback clans attempted to reestablish baseline rhythm. But for the first time, their coordination did not fully align. Clea was disrupting interpretation, not motion, and that was more dangerous. Artemis was the first Amazon to arrive at the shoreline. She didn't draw a weapon immediately. She studied Clea. "You're not supposed to be here," Artemis said. Clea smiled faintly. "And yet here I am." Nubia arrived moments later, calm but alert. "That is not arrival," Nubia said. "That is imposition." Clea looked at her for the first time with real attention. "And you are?" "Nubia," she replied simply. A pause. Then Clea nodded once. "I've heard of you." The implication was not admiration, it was classification. Orana arrived last. She felt it immediately. This was not a challenge of strength like hers, not a harmony challenge like the island's trial. This was something else entirely. A system trying to overwrite another system. She whispered, almost to herself, "This is how islands become empires." Clea walked further inland, and the island began to respond in ways it had not since the first gods descended. Not by stabilizing, not by balancing, but by resisting categorization. The Kangas shifted into emergency synchronization patterns, formations designed for unknown variable response. The great pulse logic attempted to reassert itself, but Clea adapted instantly. Every time the island adjusted, she redefined the meaning of the adjustment. She was not fighting Themyscira. She was redefining its responses as obedience. Deep in the subsurface layer, Hades observed first. "Interesting," he murmured. Poseidon's echo still lingered in ocean memory nearby. Hades continued, "She is not forcing the island." A pause. "She is convincing it that it has already agreed." The island began to fracture in interpretation. Not physically, structurally. The Kangas' synchronized system showed the first signs of mismatch. One region interpreted Clea as neutral, another as hostile, another as sovereign. The system could not unify meaning, and Themyscira depended on unified meaning. Artemis stepped forward. "She's rewriting how the island reads her," Artemis said. Nubia nodded slowly. "Not rewriting, redirecting assumption." Orana frowned. "Can we stop it?" Nubia did not answer immediately, because the truth was uncomfortable. Stopping Klee would require resisting not her power, but her definition of reality. Clea stopped at the central convergence zone. She looked around. This place is impressive, she admitted. Then she added, it will serve well her eyes. Serve what? Clea turned slightly. Order. At that word, the Kangas reacted violently for the first time. Not attacking, breaking formation. The great pulse structure fractured across multiple regions simultaneously. For the first time in recorded island history, synchronization failed at scale. Whoa. The island began to lose coherence. Nubia stepped forward. You are not ordering this island, she said firmly. Clea looked at her calmly. I already have. A pause. You just haven't accepted it yet. Deep beneath everything, Ares smiled, because now the island faced something it had never been designed for. Not gods of force, not gods of sea or death, but authority that did not require permission to function. The Kangas attempted full system recalibration, but Clea adapted faster. Each corrective movement was reframed before it completed. Each stabilization attempt was interpreted as compliance. Each resistance became confirmation. The island's own defense mechanisms were being linguistically and structurally inverted. Orana finally spoke. This isn't strength, she said. Clea looked at her. No, it's governance. And that was the danger. Because governance does not need to defeat systems. It only needs systems to believe they are already governed. Artemis moved. Fast. Direct. A strike meant to break illusion through force. But the island itself hesitated for a fraction of a second, because even it was uncertain how to classify Clea's reaction. And that fraction was enough. Clea did not dodge. She simply stepped aside in a way that made the strike feel like it had been misdirected from the beginning. Nubia saw it clearly now. She's turning resistance into agreement, she said quietly. Orana clenched her fists. Then we don't resist. A pause. We redefine her. For the first time since arrival, Clea smiled more fully. Now that, she said, is interesting. And beneath them, the Kangas began something new. Not great pulse. Not anchor response. Not trial pattern. Something unrecorded. A fourth state of motion. One that did not respond to Clea, but refused to be interpreted by her. The island was beginning to fight back in the only way it could against governance, by becoming unclassifiable. And somewhere deep below all of it, Ares leaned back in his containment. Because now Themyscira had something worse than gods, oceans, and death. It had a queen who tried to define reality by authority alone. And an island that was learning how to refuse definition itself. Characters, places, and group species. Characters, Queen Clea, Artemis of Banamigdal, Nubia, Orana, Ares, Poseidon, Echo Presence, Poseidon, Hades, Subsurface Observer, Hades, Places, Themyscira, Northern Coastline of Themyscira, Central Convergence Zone, Deep Subsurface Layers. Group Species, Kangas, Alien Species of Themyscira, Hopsworn Clans, Amazons of Themyscira, Atlanteans. Paradise Island number 7, Apollo and the Light That Judges. Themyscira had survived war disguised as gods, gods disguised as kings, and kings disguised as order. Queen Clea's arrival had fractured something deep within the island, not physically, but conceptually. The Kangas had responded by evolving beyond synchronized motion into something harder to define, refusal of interpretation. The island no longer simply reacted to forces. It resisted being understood incorrectly. But resistance always attracts attention, and attention, in divine terms, eventually becomes a rival. Themyscira, it began with light, not sunlight, not firelight, not divine illumination. This was structured radiance, light that behaved upper atmosphere. The sky above Themyscira began to brighten, in a perfect geometric bloom, as if reality itself had been arranged into a precise equation of brilliance. The ocean reflected it, but did not distort it. The land beneath it did not warm. It simply accepted observation. The Kangas felt it instantly. Every clan across the island halted. Not in confusion this time, in recognition of evaluation. And then he descended. Apollo. He did not fall through the sky. He unfolded through it. Light did not bend around him, it organized itself around his presence, forming a controlled column of radiant symmetry. Where Poseidon was pressure and Hades was consequence, Apollo was definition. He looked at Themyscira the way a judge looks at a system that claims to be self-regulating, and he did not approve. On the shoreline, Artemis immediately felt it. "This is different," she said sharply. Nubia stood still, eyes narrowed slightly. "This is inspection." Orana felt something she could not easily name. Not fear, not pressure, correction. Apollo stepped onto the island without hesitation. The moment his foot touched the sand, the coastline aligned itself slightly. Not physically forced, reorganized. The Kangas along the perimeter shifted involuntarily, not in panic, but in forced synchronization. Their movements attempted to match an unseen standard imposed by Apollo's presence, and that was the problem. The island was being graded. Apollo looked around. "This is what remains when gods are not allowed to rule," he said calmly. His voice carried no anger, only assessment. "And yet it persists." A pause. "That is either impressive," his gaze sharpened slightly, "or incorrect." Deep beneath Themyscira, Ares stirred again, not in conflict, in recognition. "Ah," he murmured, "the sun that measures rather than burns." Apollo raised his hand slightly. Light expanded outward, not explosive but corrective. It scanned the island in structured waves, passing through forests, cliffs, ocean boundaries, and even subsurface layers where Ares was contained. The Kangas reacted instantly, not resisting, recalibrating. Their formations across the island attempted to maintain identity while being subjected to external standardization. The Great Pulse logic tried to assert itself, but Apollo's light dissected rhythm into measurable components. And for the first time since their existence began, the Kangas were being quantified. Nubia stepped forward. "You are not here to judge us," she said. Apollo looked at her directly. "I am here because you already judge yourselves." A pause, and failed to agree on the result. Artemis clenched her fists. "We don't need your approval." Apollo tilted his head slightly. "I did not offer approval." Another pause. "I offered correction." Orana stepped forward next. "This island doesn't need correction," she said carefully. Apollo's gaze shifted to her. "And yet," he replied, "it changes every time something powerful arrives. A subtle movement of light." That implies instability. The Kangas began to shift again, but differently than before. Apollo's radiance was forcing them into interpretive clarity. Every movement became simplified. Every formation became readable. Every adaptive response became standardized into measurable patterns. The island's refusal of definition was being overwritten by structure. And structure, once imposed, is difficult to unlearn. Deep in the subsurface, Hades observed quietly. "He is doing something worse than invasion," Hades said. Poseidon's distant echo stirred faintly. "He is making it understandable." Apollo began walking inland. With each step, Themyscira adjusted, not collapsing, not resisting, aligning. Forests straightened subtly. Water flows recalculated. Wind patterns stabilized into symmetrical distribution. The island was becoming legible, and that was not what it was designed for. Artemis moved first. She struck. Fast. Direct. But Apollo did not defend. He simply let the light between them reorganize the intent of the attack. The strike did not miss. It became unnecessary. Artemis froze mid-motion. "That's not possible," she muttered. Apollo looked at her calmly. "It is if the system you are using is inconsistent." Nubia stepped in front of him. "This island is not yours to standardize," she said firmly. Apollo regarded her. "It already is," he replied. A pause, "because it cannot decide what it is without disagreement." Orana's voice cut through tension. "So you replace disagreement with your version of truth?" Apollo turned toward her. "I replace instability with clarity. A beat. And clarity is not ownership." The Kangas suddenly stopped moving. Not fully synchronized this time. Not fully fractured either. A suspended state. They were no longer purely reacting to Apollo. They were reacting to being defined while resisting definition. And that contradiction created something new. The island began to split its response systems. One layer accepted Apollo's structure, one layer rejected it, one layer attempted to merge both. For the first time, Themyscira was no longer a unified system of balance. It was becoming a layered argument. Deep beneath everything, Ares smiled, because now the island had been tested by war, death, sea, governance, and now by truth structured as law. This, he whispered, is how systems begin to crack. Apollo stopped at the central convergence zone. This place is remarkable, he admitted. A pause, but inconsistent. He raised his hand slightly. I can fix that. The Kangas reacted violently for the first time since his arrival. Not in attack, in contradiction. Their movement patterns fractured into competing interpretations of Apollo's light. The Great Pulse logic tried to restore harmony, but Apollo's system demanded uniformity. The island could not satisfy both. Artemis stepped forward again. You're turning life into measurement, she said. Apollo responded without emotion. I am turning measurement into stability. Nubia looked at the island. For the first time, she saw something concerning. Themyscira was not rejecting Apollo fully. It was considering compliance. Orana noticed it too, and whispered, if we accept clarity without choice, we stop being us. Apollo paused. For the first time, something in his expression shifted slightly. Not anger, interest. Because the island had finally produced a response that was not purely physical or systemic. It was philosophical resistance. And deep beneath them all, Ares leaned forward slightly in his containment. Because now Themyscira was facing something no god of war, sea, death, or governance had achieved. A god who could make everything make sense, even if it stopped being alive in the process. Characters, places, and group species. Characters: Apollo, Artemis of Bana Magdal, Artemis of Bana Magdal, Nubia, Orana, Ares, Hades, observer presence. Hades, Poseidon, echo presence, Poseidon. Places: Themyscira, central convergence zone, coastal regions of Themyscira, subsurface containment layers. Groups: species: Kangas, alien species of Themyscira, Hopsworn clans, Amazons of Themyscira. Amazons of Themyscira, Olympian gods. Paradise Island number 8, the silence after Ares. Themyscira had survived inspection by light, governance by authority, and judgment by depth. Apollo's departure did not feel like victory. It felt like subtraction. The structured radiance he brought, light that turned everything into measurable truth, had left faint ghost lines across the island. Not physical damage, but lingering tendencies. For a time after he left, forests grew too evenly spaced. Waves struck the shore with unnatural rhythm. Even the Kanga's Great Pulse carried a faint residue of standardization before it slowly broke apart again into natural variation. And beneath it all, something remained unchanged. Ares was still there, not active, not fighting, imprisoned. Ares, the sealing of the god of war, had not been a single moment. It had been an agreement forced into existence by contradiction. Poseidon's pressure, Hades' consequence, Apollo's structure, the Kanga's living synchronization, and the island itself refusing to collapse under divine disagreement, instead converting conflict into layered containment. But containment is never silence. It is pressure that has nowhere to go. Themyscira, deep beneath Themyscira's visible world, Ares existed within a lattice of living motion. Not chains, not stone, not magic in the traditional sense. He was held by rhythm. Every step a Kanga took across the island subtly reinforced or redistributed the pattern that kept him contained. Every shift in ocean tide reinforced the coastal boundaries of the seal. Every Amazon patrol unknowingly contributed to micro-adjustments in the island's balance. The island was no longer just land. It was a system that had learned how to imprison a god without ever stopping him from existing. And that was the problem. Ares was not gone. He was integrated into the structure of restraint. On the surface, life continued, but it was no longer simple. The Amazons felt it first. Training sessions became sharper, more precise. Movements felt answered by the environment itself. A strike against a training post would subtly echo through the island's systems, reinforcing stability patterns that extended far beyond the physical impact. The Kangas felt it too. Their Great Pulse run no longer felt entirely free. There was a center of gravity in their motion now, not visible, not moving, but always influencing direction. Artemis noticed it during sparring. She struck a stone pillar harder than necessary. The impact did not break the stone. It absorbed the blow and redistributed force into the ground in a pattern that stabilized nearby terrain. She stepped back slowly. The island is still using him, she said. Artemis of Bana Migdal. Nubia arrived beside her. She watched the ground carefully. It is not using him, she said. It is balancing against him. Nubia, a pause. And there is a difference. Orana stood slightly apart from them. She had changed since Apollo's arrival. She no longer tried to force alignment. She no longer tried to win against structure. Instead, she studied it. Now she spoke quietly. Everything here has a counterweight. Artemis glanced at her. Even gods? Orana nodded. Especially gods. Far below them, Ares shifted for the first time since full containment. Not in escape, not in rage, in awareness. Because something about the island's new equilibrium had changed. It was no longer purely reactive. It was adaptive around him. And that meant Themyscira had begun treating him not as a threat to eliminate, but as a constant to manage. The Kangas felt it next. A subtle distortion in the Great Pulse lattice. Not a break, a drift. Their synchronized movement across the island began to form a secondary pattern, one that wrapped around the containment zone like a protective orbit. The Stormstride clans reinforced coastal pressure points. Deepfern clans adjusted subsurface vibration dampening. Skybound Kangas shifted atmospheric alignment. It was no longer just containment. It was stabilization of containment. And in that realization, the island changed again. Because something had been added to its identity, a permanent divine pressure at its core. Artemis looked toward the horizon. So we're a prison now, she said. Nubia corrected her without hesitation. No, a pause. We are a balanced structure. Orana frowned. That sounds the same. Nubia shook her head slightly. A prison ends movement. This does not. As if to prove the point, the island responded. The Kangas began the Great Pulse run again. But it was different now. Not disrupted. Not fully natural. A third mode had formed, one that flowed around the invisible weight beneath the island. Every leap, every stride, every coordinated shift was now partially shaped by the presence of Ares below. The island was running around a deep within containment. Ares smiled faintly, because now he understood something important. He was not trapped in Themyscira. He was part of its architecture. And architecture, once accepted, is very difficult to remove. Then something unexpected happened, a faint pulse, not from Olympus, not from sea, not from underworld, from the island itself, a new signal, one not created by gods, but by accumulation. The Kangas paused mid-motion. For the first time since Ares was sealed, all clans experienced the same uncertainty at once. Not fear, not disruption, but anticipation. Something was forming, something that required all prior balance systems to remain intact. Artemis felt it first. This isn't another god, she said slowly. Nubia narrowed her eyes. No. Orana whispered, this is something that needs the gods already here to stay in place. And beneath everything, Ares stopped smiling, because even he did not recognize this new pattern. Themyscira was no longer just reacting to divinity, it was preparing for something that required divinity to remain stable. The island had learned a new principle. Some future events require all present forces to remain exactly as they are. Even gods, even prisons, even balance itself. And far beyond the horizon of the world, unseen and unformed, something began to approach the concept of Themyscira, and found it already waiting. Characters, places, and groups, species. Characters, Ares, Artemis of Bana Migdal. Artemis of Bana Migdal, Nubia, Orana places, Themyscira, subsurface containment lattice, central training grounds, coastal stabilization zones, atmospheric alignment layer. Group species, Kangas, alien species of Themyscira, Hopshorn clans, Amazons of Themyscira. Amazons of Themyscira, Olympian gods, Olympian gods.